My name is Noah Sterling, and for 8 years I sold enterprise software the slow way. I led discovery calls with more questions than slides, translated compliance into contracts, and wrote in plain English what our platform could and could not do. At Atlas CRM, I carried a slim ledger to every meeting: assumptions, risks, measurable outcomes. Last year I closed $7.3 million in annual recurring revenue and posted the lowest churn in the division. Harbor Mutual, LendWest Bank, Meridian Freight. I won them with proofs of concept that hurt on the front end and paid off on the back end. Procurement trusted me because I never hid the red lines. Legal trusted me because I could read a master service agreement without flinching. I slept well because my clients did. The breeze shifted when the new chief revenue officer arrived. His name was Mason Cole, a man who measured urgency by volume and called transparency a nice to have. He changed pipeline reviews to a weekly stage gate. He wanted commitments in Q1 for features that did not yet exist. He called it narrative alignment. He called my risk register fear. In one meeting, he deleted the slide where I listed limitations and said the deck needed to be frictionless. He added an auto-renew clause with an uplift that I had always negotiated away and told me to stop teaching clients to negotiate against us. When I sent a plain language addendum to a hospital group spelling out uptime, data residency, and breach notification windows, he wrote back a single sentence: "You are not competitive if you educate buyers." Jenna, my manager, pulled me aside and told me to adapt. I smiled, closed my notebook, and felt the first small crack form under my feet. The break came on a Tuesday forecast call. Mason shared his new slide for Redwood Logistics, a national freight broker with a painful returns problem. He wanted a signed order by month end, based on a promised, predictive routing module. That product had not moved beyond a prototype. "They are buying the story," he said. "Sign now, change order later." I asked a simple question: where in the order form will we codify exceptions and thresholds so it is enforceable? He smiled like a coach who had just benched a player. "You are not in legal, you are in revenue." I said I would not name a ship date I could not defend in a statement of work. He rolled the slide forward and told the room I was confusing honesty with weakness. People laughed because they were afraid to be seen not laughing. I closed my ledger and felt the crack widen. 2 days later, Jenna handed me a performance improvement plan. 30 days. 3 net new logos above $100,000 in recurring revenue. Discount ceiling at 5%. 0 churn risk on 2 renewals, including Harbor Mutual. Compliance with the new messaging. The document included a line that stung like a small cut. Do not volunteer limitations unless explicitly requested by the buyer. I asked Jenna if that language came from legal. She looked past me at the window and said this was the path. I signed receipt, not agreement, and wrote, "I will follow the code of conduct and the law." That afternoon I filed an anonymous report on the ethics hotline, attaching my email thread, with product confirming the module was not general availability, and a Slack exchange where Mason wrote, "We sell the future. Delivery is a separate conversation." I saved the ticket number in my notebook like a seed. The next test came with Harbor's renewal. Our original master service agreement capped any uplift at 2% and required a mutual review 90 days prior. Mason pushed a new auto-renew addendum with a 7% uplift and a shortened notice window. "They will never read it," he said. "Their procurement team is underwater." I sent Harbor a plain summary of changes, flagged the uplift, and recommended we honor our original spirit. Mason called me into a glass room and shut the door. "You are training buyers to extract concessions." I said I was honoring a promise. He said I had violated chain of command. He demanded I retract my summary and submit the new addendum without commentary. I refused. He smiled the way a man smiles when he believes the game is his. "Then we will move on." Human Resources scheduled a meeting for Friday at 10. Carla from HR, read from a prepared sheet. Atlas CRM is ending your employment effective today due to cultural misalignment and lack of competitiveness. At will, no cause. 10 weeks of severance if I signed a release within 5 business days. Mutual non-disparagement. Return of property. A reminder of restrictive covenants. A 12-month non-compete in enterprise customer relationship software, and a 12-month non-solicitation of any client I had contacted in the prior year. I asked for time to review. Carla nodded like a metronome. Jenna tried to speak and then did not. Mason watched the table as if it were a scoreboard. Security waited outside with a cardboard box. My laptop went cold in my hands as IT disabled access. I slid my notebook into the box and placed my badge on Carla's page. The elevator ride down felt like descending into water. On the sidewalk, I counted my breath until the shaking stopped. My phone vibrated with a text from Mai at Harbor. "Everything okay?" I stared and did not answer. The non-solicitation clause was clear. I would not hand them any excuse to call this a breach. I walked home along the river and sat at the kitchen table where I had written every honest email in 8 years. I opened my ledger and wrote 10 lines that were not about revenue. I will not trade a short quarter for a long regret. I will read every clause that binds a buyer. I will never confuse pressure with leadership. Then I called an employment attorney a friend recommended. His name was Arjun Patel. He read the severance, the release, the restrictive covenants, and the invention assignment. He explained that our state had recently narrowed the enforceability of non-competes, and that courts looked hard at scope, geography, and legitimate business interest. He told me to preserve evidence of my ethics report, and to avoid contacting clients until we had a strategy. He said to bargain for a carve-out that would allow me to serve buyers who contacted me first. His voice was calm. Mine finally matched it. I turned off my phone, made tea I could taste, and let something simple settle inside me. They had taken my job. They had not taken my name. By Sunday, the shape of the injustice came into focus. It was not a bad quarter or a rough personality. It was a system. A story-first pipeline that treated contracts as marketing collateral. A stage gate that rewarded whatever words could be typed into Salesforce. A leadership team that used legal language as a net rather than a promise. My ethics ticket sat in a quiet inbox somewhere, while Mason rewrote slides. I laid my notebook flat and studied my own handwriting like evidence. Every honest summary, every redline clause, every call note, where a buyer asked for clarity and I gave it. That was my inventory. That was also my weapon. He had dismissed honesty as a weakness. He had underestimated how durable it makes a reputation. Arjun and I met on video Monday morning. He wore a blue tie and spoke like a careful judge. He believed the non-compete was overbroad. It named an entire industry and offered no reasonable geographic limit. Our state had recently adopted restrictions that required a salary threshold and a narrowly tailored scope. I qualified on salary but not on scope. He drafted a response to HR, declining the severance unless they carved out a safe path. The letter cited statutory changes, recent appellate decisions, and the company's own code of conduct that promised no retaliation for good faith reports. We asked for 3 items in writing: a release from the non-compete as long as I did not use confidential information, a narrow non-solicitation that allowed me to serve any buyer who contacted me first, and permission to state my tenure and role without the taint of non-disparagement. He sent it certified. He told me to wait, document, and breathe. While we waited, I ran numbers. 12 months of savings if I cut to a small apartment office and bought a marketplace health plan instead of Cobra. A lean stack, domain, email, secure storage with assigned data processing addendum, e-signature with an audit trail, a basic site with a privacy policy that I could read without wincing. I filed an LLC under a name that felt like a promise rather than a pitch: Sterling Client Works. I requested an EIN, opened a business account, and applied for professional liability insurance, with language that covered advisory services on contracts and implementations. I called a CPA and discussed an S election next year, if revenue justified it. The discipline felt like stepping stones in a cold river, one at a time. No leaps. The offering was next. I sketched it until the paper grew soft. A plain English sales audit that would review a company's funnel for truth friction rather than vanity friction. A red line defense, where I sat with legal and procurement and translated product promises into enforceable statements of work, service levels, and remedies. A renewal rescue that honored the spirit of master agreements and kept lift reasonable, an implementation guardrail that measured only what could be measured and wrote it into the plan. I priced by outcome rather than hours. A fixed fee with a narrow scope and a refundable milestone if value was not met. No bait. No vague phrases. Each service came with a 1-page appendix that defined terms: availability, uptime, data residency, disaster recovery. I borrowed nothing from Atlas other than the habit of writing clearly. I would not bring a single proprietary slide. I would bring the habit they had tried to delete: how to tell the world without inviting a claim. Arjun was firm. No outreach to Atlas clients. No private messages. No hints. He approved a public note because the law allows a person to earn a living. I wrote a short message on LinkedIn 2 weeks after my termination. Grateful for 8 years of learning. Launching Sterling ClientWorks to help teams sell and deliver what they can promise. If we have worked together, you know my approach. My door is open to new problems. Helms. I did not list a single logo. I did not mention Atlas. I turned off comments for a day to let the echo die. Then I turned them back on and let the small circle of people who knew my work say whatever they wished. They remembered the way I handled hard calls. They remembered the night I stayed late to rewrite a data processing addendum for a hospital that needed clarity on breach notification. They remembered that I never rushed a signature to hit a quarter. I built tools I wished I had been given. A one-sheet for buyers titled Before You Sign that defined economic out clauses, cure periods, indemnity, limitation of liability caps, audit rights, and notice windows in plain language. A readiness checklist for internal teams who were about to face Mason's kind of salesperson. A simple calculator that estimated the cost of hidden uplifts across a 3-year term. I did not sell fear, I sold competence. I joined a small ethics and sales consortium and offered to teach a pro bono session for startups at the co-working space. If no one hired me, at least I would leave a trail of usefulness. At night I outlined the first 3 months like a playbook. Week 1, legal footing. Week 2, content that would stand as evidence of my intent. Week 3, pilot clients who were not in Atlas territory at all. I reached out to a nonprofit network and offered a free audit to test the methodology. They said yes within an hour. I scheduled calls with 2 former colleagues in product who had already left Atlas for greener places. I wanted to stress test my services against their roadmaps and see where friction would rise. I did not gossip. I asked for critique. They gave me more than I wanted and exactly what I needed. Friday, a courier delivered an envelope with the Atlas logo. They agreed to our carve-outs. They added a sentence that read like a sigh. Atlas acknowledges Mr. Sterling's right to compete fairly. I signed and returned it. My hands were steady. I opened my calendar and blocked a morning for the ethics hotline follow-up. Arjun helped me draft a letter to the chair of the audit committee. Not a threat, not a demand. A record. I attached my ticket number and the messages that had triggered it. If they ever argued I left because I could not perform, there would be a clock that told a different time. I closed the day by taking my ledger to the river. I wrote a new page at the back. Principle is a strategy when you write it down and execute it. The sun slipped behind the bridge. My phone buzzed once. A number I did not save. A voice I knew well. It said only this. If you have time next week, I would like to speak. Then the call ended. I let the quiet return and felt something like balance. The plan was not loud. It was lawful. It was mine. The first field test was quiet and clean. The nonprofit invited me to review their pending contract for a donor management system. I used the sales audit and redline defense as written, no improvisation. We mapped their risks to clauses: availability, data export, termination, indemnity, limitation of liability. I showed their director how a vague, commercially reasonable efforts in the service level could be replaced with a measurable uptime and a defined service credit schedule. We fixed a one-sided audit right, narrowed jurisdiction, extended the breach notification window from a moving, promptly, to a hard 48 hours. They signed with confidence, not speed, and sent me a short note that made my hands still. This is the first time I understood what I was buying. Jor, I kept that sentence like a small light on a dark stair. The unknown caller turned out to be Maya. She put her request in writing before we spoke. We want an independent review of the renewal terms and proposed addendum. You will not solicit us. We contacted you. Arjun approved the engagement letter with a tight scope and a conflict disclosure that named Atlas. We used my template MSA, a one-page SOW, a fixed fee, an outcome definition, and a refund clause if value was not delivered. I sent a W-9 and a certificate of insurance. Harbor, countersigned within a day, and wired a modest retainer. I opened a folder with numbered memos and a document log with hash values for every file. This was not drama. This was chain of custody for trust. The memos were clinical. Memo 1 cited Section 4.2 of the original Master Service Agreement, capping uplift at 2% and requiring notice 90 days prior. The proposed addendum created a 7% uplift and shortened notice to 30 days without stating consideration. Memo 2 analyzed the auto-renew language, which attempted to bind Harbor to a term beyond the original renewal structure. Memo 3 compared the current product capabilities with the proposed predictive routing, and flagged the risk of constructive misrepresentation if promises outpaced the statement of work. I recommended a counter that restored the cap, preserved the notice window, and required the routing module to be delivered as a separate, optional order form after general availability. I attached a draft writer in plain English that did not attack Atlas. It simply held the terms to what a reasonable buyer would expect. Harbor scheduled a review with their CFO, general counsel, and head of operations. I listened more than I spoke, and then read 2 paragraphs that fit on 1 page. The room settled. Lydia, their general counsel, said she had felt pushed into a corner by urgency and appreciated the air. We decided to communicate only in writing and to keep phone calls to agenda items with follow-up summaries. When Harbor sent the writer, Mason inserted himself into the thread within minutes. He claimed Harbor had already, verbally aligned, to the uplift, and that the module was, roadmap committed. Lydia replied with a sentence that clipped like a seal. Our agreement is written and mutual. Please respond to the draft writer with red lines. He pushed for a same-day call. She offered dates next week and asked him to include their product counsel. My job was to keep the table level. I did that with a calm calendar and a baseline of facts. Atlas sent a letter that afternoon accusing me of violating the non-solicitation covenant. Arjun's response was measured and final. He enclosed the carve-out agreement, my LinkedIn post, Maya's initial email, and the engagement letter. He reminded Atlas that their own release recognized my right to compete fairly. The letter ended with an invitation to direct future concerns to counsel. There were no more letters. While that dust settled, the nonprofit posted a short note about my before-you-sign checklist. 2 operations leads from unrelated companies reached out through my site. Inbound felt different. There was no chase, there was a question and a clock. I would either answer with value or I would not be hired. The second major engagement came from Redwood, the same prospect Mason had used as a trophy slide. Their COO, Elena Vargas, called after reading my post about truth friction. They had not signed with Atlas. They were struggling to separate product promise from current reality. I ran a vendor-neutral assessment. I asked for proof of function, not demos. I requested SOC2, Type 2 reports, data residency statements, and escalation matrices. I built a decision matrix with weighted criteria and asked them to put dollars to delay. The predictive routing was a prototype with 2 pilots and no published service levels. I proposed an RFP addendum that required a 3-phase SOW with go-no-go gates, the right to terminate at each gate without penalty, and knowledge transfer clauses to avoid lock-in. Elena looked at the matrix and said she felt like someone had cleaned a window. She did not offer me gratitude. She offered me a contract extension to run the bake-off to completion. I hired one person on a contractor basis, a former project coordinator named Ruth, who could build order out of noise. She set up a secure client portal, enforced naming conventions, and created closeout packets with lessons learned. We published a privacy policy with contact details and a data processing addendum that any client could countersign. I bought a simple errors and omissions rider that covered contract advisory work. I branded nothing with my name. The firm needed to be more than me if it was going to last. Every invoice had a project code, a service description, and an outcome line that would either be earned or refunded. I slept the way I used to before forecast calls. Harbor's counteroffer moved like a chess match. Atlas returned red lines that tried to keep the 7% uplift and waive service credits for planned maintenance that had grown from 2 hours a month to 8. We produced a maintenance calendar and showed how 4 additional windows would erase the practical value of the uptime figure. We offered a split uplift of 2% this year and 2% next year if mutual metrics were achieved. We required the routing module to be sold only after general availability, with an audit of the deliverable tied to a remediation plan. Lydia sent the document. Mason escalated to a vice president and suggested that relationships would suffer if Harbor did not meet the market. Lydia copied their CEO and wrote that the market she would meet was the one written in her contracts. She asked Mason to keep all future communications in writing. He agreed. The sound of that single word, written rather than spoken, was the sound of gravity returning to the room. By the end of the month, my ledger had new kinds of entries, not logos, not badged wins, dates, deliverables, and the small sentences people write when they feel their work has been respected. The plan was now a practice. I did not hurry the next part. I did not need to. A calendar reminder blinked for Harbor's renewal meeting and another for Redwood's board review of the bake-off. I closed my notebook, checked the rider one last time, and felt the same steady thing I had felt the day Arjun mailed the first letter. The work would either stand under weight or it would not. Either way, the floor would not crack under my feet again. Harbor's renewal meeting opened with a clock and a silence that felt earned. Lydia shared her screen with a clean red line. Section 4. 2 preserved at a 2% cap, 90 days, notice restored, planned maintenance confined to a posted calendar with no more than 2 hours monthly, service credits applying regardless of business hour definitions. The routing module moved to a separate order form after general availability with a verification step. Mason joined late and began with volume. He said, "Market norm, 6 times in 4 minutes." Lydia asked him to identify which clause created consideration for the uplift. He could not. She pointed to the original mutual notice requirement. She reminded him that Harbor's board had tied executive bonus to contract discipline after an audit last year. She asked him if Atlas intended to stand behind its written promises. The room was still. He asked for a sidebar. She declined and returned to the red lines. "I spoke only once. Our rider simply enforces the bargain both parties believe they signed." The CFO nodded. Harbor executed 2 days later. The uplift remained at 2%. The auto-renew trap was gone. The module would arrive when it was real. Lydia sent me a single line. "We kept the spirit." I added it to the ledger. Redwood's decision came next. I presented the scorecard in a boardroom that smelled like toner and fatigue. Weighted criteria. Evidence links. Proof of function clips. The so-called predictive routing scored well on vision, poorly on deliverability. A competitor's current module scored lower on papers but higher on measured outcomes in similar networks. I did not recommend a vendor, I recommended Gates. Phase 1 integration with rollback rights. Phase 2 limited to 3 lanes with a termination for convenience window. Phase 3 only after 3 consecutive months of service levels met. Elena asked me to quantify delay cost against lock-in risk. I showed a table that matched dollars to days. The chair closed his binder and said he was tired of being sold tomorrow. They awarded the contract to the competitor with the 3-gate SOW and hired my firm to run implementation guardrails across the program. It was a sizable fee by my modest scale, and an honest one by any scale. We signed on a single page. The wave I had not counted on rose from Harbor's procurement team. Someone posted an internal memo on their vendor portal titled "Contract Hygiene Wins." It did not name me. It did not need to. It listed the clauses they had defended and why. Within a week, I had 6 inbound requests that all opened with the same sentence. "We contacted you." Meridian Freight asked for a renewal rescue. LendWest wanted a redline defense on a data residency appendix for their EU expansion. A hospital group I had once supported through a breach drill asked me to refresh their incident playbook before renegotiation. I sent conflict disclosures and tight scopes. Arjun reviewed every engagement. I said no to 3 that felt like they wanted a cudgel rather than a partner. The rest became work. Atlas responded in the way large companies often do. Quietly and too late. An all-hands email leaked to 3 different inboxes. "We are refining our go-to-market language to align with delivery commitments." The message closed with a sentence that sounded like it had been written in a hallway. "Mason Cole will be leaving Atlas to pursue new opportunities." Jenna called me at night and apologized in a voice that shook. She said the audit committee had followed up on my ethics ticket after the audit chair received my letter. She said legal now reviewed roadmap language before it left a slide. She said she had kept my notebook words in her head. "I will not confuse pressure with leadership." "No," I told her the line was hers to keep. She cried for a minute and then laughed. She said the pipeline felt lighter. Harbor's signature rippled. "Their CIO invited me to a quarterly business review and asked if I would train their teams on before you sign." The room filled with people who had been told for years that speed was value. We walked through indemnity, limitation of liability, cure, termination, force majeure, audit rights, data export. I showed how to ask for service credits without turning a meeting into a courtroom. We practiced saying, "Please put that in the SOW." They left with checklists and a sense that they could slow a bad moment without losing momentum. The CIO shook my hand and said, "You found a way to sell calm." I did not correct him. Calm is not something you sell. It is something you practice in public until it spreads. Redwood's first gate closed with a green check, not because technology worked by magic, but because people knew what success meant in a sentence. Uptime measured. On-call escalation met. Data export verified. We cut a small check to the vendor for missing a response time metric by 4 minutes on a Saturday. No one argued. Everyone understood the math. Elena sent me a note that read, "We did not buy promises, we bought proof." I wrote it under Lydia's line. The page was starting to look like a creed. The final turn came in a place designed for noise. A logistics conference in a downtown hotel, with low ceilings and loud music. Atlas had a booth with a new tagline, "Delivered Promises." A junior representative I did not know offered me a brochure without looking up. On the main stage, Elena spoke on procurement without friction. She described the decision matrix and the 3 gates. She said they had been advised by an independent firm focused on contract clarity. She did not say my name. She did not need to. The panel ended. In the hallway, Mason stood by an exit in an untucked shirt with a badge that had no company. He avoided my eye. I felt no heat. I felt gravity and breath. Jenna texted me a screenshot of the official internal memo. Following a review by the audit committee, leadership will align representations with contractual commitments. Changes to renewal practices are effective immediately. Under it, one more sentence. No retaliation for good faith reporting will be tolerated. We both knew why those words were there. We did not need to say them out loud. The quarter closed. My firm posted 3 clients and 4 in progress. No champagne. Just a quiet dinner with Ruth where we talked about capacity and hiring a privacy counsel on retainer. I closed my ledger on a page filled with other people's sentences that had become the story. They thought honesty would cost me speed. It turned out to be the strongest engine I had. The victory did not feel like a shout. It felt like a floor that did not move when I stepped. I measured the first year in sentences rather than invoices, a ledger of small proofs. Harbors, we kept the spirit. Redwoods, we bought proof. Hospitals, we finally understand our indemnity clause. 10 clients across finance, logistics, and healthcare. 2 refunds issued without debate when value fell short. 0 disputes. My calendar held more training than I had expected. Before You Sign became a standing workshop. We added a half day on audit rights and incident response. I did not chase growth. I protected a rhythm where every promise could be stood under if the room went quiet and a lawyer pressed a finger to a clause. I wrote my practice into 5 rules and posted them on the site. Ask in detail. Write in plain language. Verify before you promise. Deliver what is written. Audit the result. We called it the clarity loop, not because it was clever, but because it told a buyer exactly how we worked. Each engagement began with a 1-page summary that translated every obligation into outcomes and dates. Each renewal started with the calendar of planned maintenance and the math behind uptime. If we ever proposed an uplift, we wrote the consideration beside it in a single line. A promise is either priced or it is theater. We chose price. Mason did not occupy my thoughts for long. He was not a villain. He was a symptom of an idea that says speed cleans the mess. It never does. It only hides it until a renewal or a breach. The real antagonist was the habit of telling a story first and making the contract a stage prop. That habit failed when Lydia asked for consideration and when Elena asked for service levels in numbers, not adjectives. The audit committee's memo mattered, but what changed the air were rooms where procurement and sales could meet without fear. Respect is not soft. It is the structure that keeps a company standing when a quarter disappoints. I kept learning. I hired a privacy counsel on retainer and sat through sessions on subpoenas and data export formats. I rewrote my own engagement letter twice after a client pointed out an ambiguity and termination for convenience. I apologized and shipped a corrected version the same day. Integrity is not an ornament for winning. It is the least expensive way to fix a mistake. A junior former colleague wrote to say she had used Before You Sign to slow a forced quarter-end deal without losing it. We told them we would buy. When the statement of work said what the demo showed, I copied her line into the ledger. Truth compels courage in both directions. The work changed me in smaller ways that mattered. I spoke more slowly. I left more quiet in meetings. I stopped confusing volume with conviction. I learned that legal language is not a weapon if you wield it to create symmetry. I learned that a fair contract makes teams kinder during outages because everyone knows how to make a bad night right. I learned that saying no to the wrong project is a form of respect for the next client. My pride shifted from deals won to disputes avoided. If there is a moral, it is stubborn and simple. Honesty is not a pose, it is a system. When you respect people enough to tell them what a product can do, and what it cannot. You trade short spikes for long, compounding trust. When you write promises as obligations with numbers, you protect both sides from the mood of a quarter. When you refuse to sell what you cannot deliver, you force invention to occur where it belongs, inside the work. The ones who underestimated that looked at patience and saw weakness. They never saw the structure behind it. On a quiet Friday, I opened my ledger to the last page and wrote a sentence I wanted to carry into every room. Sell only what you can stand under with the contract in your hand. I closed the book and turned off the lights. Some victories end with a cheer. Mine ended with the steady sound of a floor that would hold.